And so, Sammy, I've done so much media over the last week or so, ever since Ben Johnson has been hired. And forgive me if I'm repeating myself because it feels like I am. I keep talking about the same talking points over and over again. But I do believe over the last few days, it's been really nice watching everything unfolding, the way it's unfolded in Jacksonville, the way it unfolded in Dallas, and of course, what's going on with nobody wanting to coach the Saints. It feels strange that the Bears are the model organization, the team that absolutely did it right. And I was on a show with the Barroom Network, and we had Rick, and I was on with Rick Smith, the agent for Ben Johnson, and the competency of which he spoke of with the Bears, and no messing around with going out there and getting their guy. Like it's a brave new world where the Bears identified who they wanted, met all the parameters that needed to be met, and they got the guy. And now this week, the news continues to get better. Dennis Allen is the new defensive coordinator of the Chicago Bears. Declan Rice is he's not the new offensive coach. Sorry. This is going to be so tricky. I'm going to make our offensive coordinators not an English Premier League player. But in any event, everything seems to be shaping up. It's working in the Bears' direction. So much to talk about. So, Sammy, let's go ahead and start the show.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast with Adam Ray.
It's Hester trying to work it back to the middle. Gets past the first wave, and here he goes. It's Hester inside the 30. Hester's going to take it all the way for a touchdown. And no flag, 92 yards.
The sickest Chicago Bears and fantasy football podcast. Sports entertainment like no other. It's gonna be sick.
It's Wednesday night. You know what that means? It is time for Take It to the Rank, and the Bears are back-to-back off-season champions. And here to break it down from CHGO, our guy, Greg Braggs, was here fighting through it, fighting through the cold, trying to get himself healthy for the Super Bowl. Greg, how we living?
Living good, trying to make it through. That's right. Came down with a little bit of a cold here. Now my daughter, passed it on to my daughter, seeing who else I can pass it on to before I get on a plane here on Sunday and head to a warmer New Orleans. And I was worried there because like a week ago, we saw all that snow and ice in New Orleans, and I refuse to walk down Bourbon Street if there's going to be ice on the road. I will literally stay home. I refuse.
Fair enough. How about you just avoid Bourbon Street? There's plenty of other places to go. Actually, you know what? Lafitte's Pirate Bar is essentially on Bourbon Street, but not like Bourbon Street.
Right.
You're allowed to go there. The rest of Bourbon Street, leave it alone. Go a couple of blocks east or west, north or south. Like there's plenty of things. It's just not one street in New Orleans. There's much I need to teach you about New Orleans, and I can't wait to get after it. It's going to be a great week. As a matter of fact, when we get down to New Orleans, we will be back at the place where the Chicago Bears won the Super Bowl in 1986. The year was 1986. The season was 1985. So we'll walk around, try to find some of the bars that Jim McMahon got thrown out of, and it'll be a good time.
You want me to moon a helicopter?
If you don't mind, if you could make that happen, that'll be good. But New Orleans is a tremendous city, and I can't wait to get down there so much. CHGO will be down there. The Sick Podcast will be down there. So we'll be doing some crossover events and things like that. But now, obviously, we've reveled in the news of Ben Johnson for over a week now, but some good news on the coordinator front. Let's start with the defensive coordinator. Let's start with Dennis Allen, which to me, I felt like this was such a great hire. And this is the one that we really initially heard about, like, hey, Dennis Allen is going to be this defensive coordinator. We're like, great. And then it took a couple days. It took some time. We heard a lot of candidates coming through the door, a lot of interviews, and you're like, wait, what's going on with Dennis Allen? Can we not do it? It finally got done. They pushed it over the goal line. How do you feel about the Dennis Allen hire, and what do you expect out of his defense?
Well, I'm assuming I'm expecting some more aggressiveness, right? I mean, you saw when he was the defensive coordinator and head coach, like the ascension of how the defense improved year to year, different names that would, develop underneath, a guy like Dennis Allen. So as I've said, for the last week, to me, the Bears have the pieces in place defensively for any competent defensive coordinator to come in here and get success from this unit, as long as they're healthy. Obviously, when they lost Andrew Billings, things fell off. Ben Johnson certainly acknowledged that in his induction press conference. But now you're going to add potentially somebody, on this defensive line. You're watching the Senior Bowl here these last couple of days. Certainly seems like there's a lot of good options to add on the defensive line in the first 2 rounds. And the Bears have, 3 picks in the top 50 to get that, right? So defensive line is going to be improved. Your depth is going to be improved. And then you already have the pieces there. So for me, the biggest question, or my biggest expectation for Dennis Allen, is that he is much better on third down than Matt Eberflus was, because there just felt like there wasn't enough aggressiveness. And obviously there's a lot of variables that go into play, whether you have a good pass rush or what the score of the game is. It's not just a flat rate, what do you do every time on 3rd and 15? But the fact of the matter is Matt Eberflus failed time and again in those situations that were the pivotal moments in the game. And for me, my expectation of Dennis Allen is that he succeeds in those moments more than Matt Eberflus did.
Yeah, it was pretty disheartening at times to be sitting there and it's like 3rd and 13 and you're like, son of a bee, they're going to give this up, aren't they? And they would. And it was just the bend but don't break part of that, which was fine. It is a lot of times through the majority of the season, they weren't allowing teams the top 20 points, which is great. And you love that, and it's cool, and like there's something to be said about that philosophy. But at the same time, I also, as great as it is, sometimes I feel like it harms your offensive side of the football, which it seems counterproductive. But at the same time, like when you allow teams to drive for 9 minutes,
right,
and then even if you're holding them to a field goal, which happened a lot, and I no disrespect, because they did hold teams under 20, but you weren't allowing your offense to go out there and get into a rhythm, especially when you have a young quarterback and a bad play caller. And it'd be like, 9-minute drive, and then 3 and out, and then a 7-minute drive. And even though we'd be down 6-0, perhaps maybe even 10-0, you're like, still, like we're not touching the ball enough. And that's one of the things that I hope is that we'll be a team that's more aggressive, a team that does create some turnovers. And not only when you think about the Dennis Allen hire, I really love the Al Harris hire. Like that, I know when we flip to the offensive side, we'll talk about Antwaan Randle, but on the defensive side, like Al Harris was one of those guys who I absolutely just disliked because he was a good player. There was nothing personal. I didn't dislike him as a human being, but he was a good player and he was annoying in that sense. And now to see what he's doing with Tyreek Stevenson, like really getting on his behind already. Like we weren't even past the conference championship games, and Al Harris is already riding Tyreek Stevenson. I think that might be one of the bigger moves that we made on the defensive side of the ball.
I completely agree. If you followed, Al Harris and what he's done for the Cowboys secondary here the last couple of years, they've got some playmakers, right? And that Al Harris has been credited. When you hear what they've been doing as a secondary unit down in Dallas, I heard his name being brought up as a potential defensive coordinator option in Dallas here the last couple of years. So for him to come over here as, still a secondary coach and somebody that can be behind Dennis Allen, I think the most important thing when you're talking about trying to build this culture is you hear about Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen and the details and the preparation and organization to get their players ready and the development of those players underneath them. But you need those culture coaches, those guys that can take the message that the coaches are trying to give you and relay it to the players in a way that they can take it and trust it and then execute it. And what you saw in Detroit, and I think Ben Johnson understands that culture that he just had in Detroit. And when you look at that coaching staff, that was a lot of guys that had played the game, been there and done that, and know how to relay a message to a guy across from them, coach to player, and then get them to execute it on a level with that same intensity and bring that sense of pride with their play and that competitiveness that they all have had and shared on that football field. So I love the Al Harris hiring, and I think he's going to be a great compliment to Dennis Allen, just as Antwaan Randle will be a great compliment to Ben Johnson.
Yeah, and another thing about Dennis Allen too, when you talk about the attention to detail, I don't think that it can go understated that you need to go out there and you need to have a defensive coordinator who was once an NFL head coach, because I think that stability helps out a lot, especially a guy who you don't anticipate is going to be leaving for another head coaching job in the near future, like somebody who is going to be there for probably the long haul, thinking about somebody in that spot. And I think that Dennis Allen fits perfectly. And again, this is a touchy subject in Chicago, but having somebody on the sideline who's called the timeout in an NFL game is very important. And I feel like that's a great thing for coaches in all sports, whether it's, here or basketball or whatever it is. You always want somebody who's been there before, who can kind of be like, hey, you got to anticipate this. You got to kind of anticipate that. Ben Johnson in Chicago, or in Detroit rather, he had been known as a guy who kind of locked himself in the laboratory, kind of disappeared for days coming up with a game plan. But you know what? We need Dennis Allen there to be like, hey, you can't necessarily do that now. You got to be able to be, you're here for everybody now. You're not just the offensive coordinator. You're the head coach of this entire team. And even then, if he does, wander off here and there, Dennis Allen kind of knows what's up and can kind of help people out. So I'm excited about that part of it. And I also, because I was on the radio in Duval County this week, or today, as a matter of fact, talking about that same thing. Like when you think of somebody like Liam Cohen, I'm like, I don't know who this person is. Maybe you go out and hire Wade Phillips, but it's like he definitely needs somebody like Wade Phillips to go out there and really ground him. It's one of the things that made Sean McVay so successful early in his tenure with the LA Rams, was having Wade Phillips there. I truly believe that Dennis Allen is going to be that guy here in Chicago and is a great fit, and he's going to be here for a number of years. We always get worried about like, oh, well, when this coach gets successful, he's going to leave, which I think is a real possibility with Al Harris. But Dennis Allen should be here for the long haul. Offensively, though, however, Declan Coyle, who is a surprise to a lot of people, and it's always good. The one thing I do appreciate is when everybody's like, hey, Denver fans, like, what do we think of Declan Coyle? And the Bronco fans are like, yeah, I don't know either. Like, nobody really knows. Like, when you have Sean Payton and you're sitting there working, he worked with the tight ends. It's like, okay, so we really can't gauge this guy's based on, the production of Adam Troutman or somebody like that. So it's interesting. But the more that we go on, and the more you kind of deep dive into this, talk to some people around the league, talk to some people in the NFL coaching circles, things of that nature. You're like, Declan Coyle sounds like one of these brainiacs who, along with, Kyle Shanahan, McVay, Kevin O'Connell, Zach Taylor, these kind of guys, he feels like he's in that mold, a future head coach in waiting. Now that we've had a couple of days, Greg, what do you think about Declan?
Well, I think he's going to do exactly what Ben Johnson described the job as, part of the prerequisite when he was asked at his press conference, okay, are you going to be calling plays? And he said, yes. All right. Then what is, the requirements of your offensive coordinator? And he was like, well, they got to work late nights. And so I think that's where you see a young guy like Declan Coyle, who's probably jumping ahead of the line to get an opportunity that you wouldn't normally get. But as we pointed out last week, to take the offensive coordinator job here is somewhat of a brick wall in the road. Like, you're only going to advance so far with your reputation as an OC here that doesn't call plays. Now, if you're part of the room of the guys that unlock Caleb Williams and unleash him to the NFL into superstardom, you're going to get credit for that and eventually find another opportunity. Now, but does that mean you're going to catapult into a head coaching job, or are you going to have to take another OC job somewhere where you prove you can call plays? But this is his next stair step. It just happens to be at a place where you have a play caller ahead of you. So now your responsibilities are exactly what Ben Johnson said. The details early in the week, Monday through Wednesday, grinding the tape, staying up late, finding those little analytical details. Because that's a big thing that I want to try to find my way into. I know we got Super Bowl next week and things have happened fast this week. You have the Senior Bowl going on right now. But the analytical side of Ben Johnson, I think, is something that still is a topic that I think needs to be broached. And yes. I am curious tomorrow, because I know the assistant coaches that were just hired, and obviously Richard Hightower staying, they're all speaking to the media tomorrow morning. And so I'm curious to know like his analytical approach to the game as well, not just grinding the tape, because I know that Ben Johnson is big when it comes to analytics. He was, as much as people wanted to credit Dan Campbell as the reason the Lions were always going for it on fourth down, Ben Johnson was the one that encouraged him to follow those metrics, and that led them to being one of the most aggressive teams in football. So I think that that's going to be the role of Declan Coyle here early on. And then my biggest question when it comes to Declan Coyle and trusting Ben Johnson to build this coaching staff in this room is, all right, how are you guys going to get the most out of developing Caleb Williams? Because as I've said before, Ben Johnson can't do it by himself. So I know we'll probably get into JT Barrett here as well. I like that hiring. I like a guy that came from the Detroit Lions coaching staff, a guy that's played the game, that's been through his ups and downs in his career, now finding success as an assistant coach, coming from the Lions and coming from Ben Johnson's offensive room, knowing what the standard is, knowing how to execute that offense, and helping a guy like Caleb Williams. Well, Declan Coyle, how do you help develop Caleb Williams as a guy that came over as a tight ends coach, as a protege of someone beneath Sean Payton? That's a great start to your career at 28 years old, but how much are you going to implement what you have and then help get the most out of developing Caleb Williams, which there's still more to be developed with Caleb. So I'm excited to see it, but I'm still curious to know what that is going to be.
Yeah, and listen, Greg, I know that you would never condescend to watch an episode of the Sick Podcast with Adam Rank when you're not on it. But Cynthia Freeland did give a pretty good explanation of the analytical side of it on our show on Friday. You don't have to watch the whole thing. We eventually boot her off because Mike from Windy City Sports Cards comes on. And speaking of Windy City Sports Cards, they've got you covered for a wide variety of products. If you are a fan of the Bears, Bulls, Cubs, White Hawks, do it, I did it again, White Sox, Blackhawks, Sky, Fire, all those teams, Windy City Sports Cards has you covered with a wide variety of options. And still, even if you want something outside of the Chicago sports, if you're a fan of Bruce Lee, for instance, and you're looking for some sort of Bruce Lee collectibles, I am sure, I'm speaking for him, I've never really asked him because I always put him on the spot. Like, Mike from Windy City Sports Cards can help. I'm always like, hey, if you want to find some obscure Macho Man, Savage, or Bruce Lee stuff, he'll help you. He probably would. Like, you talk to him, he's amazing. But we thank Mike for everything and everything that Windy City Sports Cards has done. I know I threw that out of left field because I was provoked into it by Greg because he'll never watch with Sid. No, I'm just teasing.
I promise I will.
I'm joking.
I was busy because I was at Mackey Arena watching Purdue shellac the Michigan Wolverines last night.
Oh, yes. It must be interesting what it's like to watch good basketball. Here I am calling Cal State Fullerton games, which might not always be described as good basketball, but it's basketball. Our women are getting better, so I like that. I'm calling.
They got a good baseball. They got a good baseball program.
You know what's funny is I was in a meeting with the baseball coaches today because it looks like I'm going to be doing some baseball stuff as well, and be like, hey, you know what? Like, you talk to anybody who's not involved with Cal State Fullerton, they always think of the baseball program, even though last year they won like 20 games. So it wasn't great last year, but they look better now. Like, visually as a team, they look better now, just watching them mill around the batting cages today. But in any event, back to the Bears. So we love Declan kind of falls into the same category as guys like Kevin O'Connell, Zach Taylor, even Matt LaFleur. When they all coached under Sean McVay, they did not have the play calling experience, and it was difficult. So LaFleur had to go to Tennessee, get a year of play calling experience underneath Mike Vrabel before he got his job with the Green Bay Packers. KOC and Zach Taylor did not ever call plays, and they were given the benefit of the doubt because they worked with the staff, and they also had some other things working in their advantage, which Antwaan Randle and JT Barrett won't have. But still, so this is a good opportunity for Declan Doyle to go out there and be able to learn. And if the Bears offense provides to be as good as we expected or hope that it's going to be, then it's going to present itself with opportunities. But also, and it'll be good too to see Antwaan Randle eventually get into the whole coaching cycle, coaching carousel at some point. Again, when you talk about guys who played in the NFL or played high-level college football, Antwaan Randle is one of the most intriguing to me, because obviously when he arrived in Pittsburgh, he was there just after Cordell Stewart. If I'm thinking of it, if I have my timeline correct, but it's after Cordell. Yeah, it would have been after Cordell Stewart. So they're still in this mold where it's like, you're a great college quarterback in Indiana. Go enjoy playing wide receiver. Had he been drafted in the this version of the NFL, he would be playing quarterback, and they would design. So I love that aspect of him. So not only that, there's so many green flags for Antwaan Randle, a college quarterback, a do-everything utility player for the Pittsburgh Steelers, a Super Bowl champion. He was the MVP of that Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. Wasn't he? Or was it Hines Ward? I forget. Sammy, tell me. Who was Antwaan Randle? No, Antwaan Randle caught the pass from Hines Ward, I think.
He threw it.
He threw it to Hines Ward.
Right.
That's what it was. Okay, yeah. He threw the ball.
Yeah.
So we had more touchdown passes in that game than Ben Roethlisberger.
Yep.
It's kind of like for years, Lawrence McCutcheon was the only guy who threw a touchdown for the Rams in a Super Bowl until Matthew Stafford. So it's just one of those weird, quirky things. But he checked, and he's also a Chicagoland person. Like this Antwaan Randle, and I said this when Ben Johnson was hired, is like, I said, I was on record on some show somewhere. Don't make me go for it. But this was the guy I absolutely wanted on the coaching staff, and I'm excited for him to be here. I think there's nothing but upside with Antwaan Randle.
No question about it. This guy is Chicago, born and bred, went to Thornton High School, took down Kevin Garnett. I mean, when you talk to people about the pinnacle of basketball in the 90s, one of the bedrock moments in Illinois basketball history is Kevin Garnett's high school days, and Antwaan Randle and Thornton taking him down, knocking him out of the playoffs. And so he's part of history. He was drafted by the Chicago Cubs.
Yeah.
He's got so much Chicago through his DNA, and then you see the success, as you pointed out, everything he's done at the NFL level. Now you're an assistant head coach. That's why when you look at Declan Doyle as OC, okay, but Antwaan Randle is the assistant head coach. And Antwaan Randle is the guy that's coming from Detroit, just like JT Barrett, that's going to be able to instill the vision that Ben Johnson has and understands the standard of how they play a certain way. Going to get these receivers, on the right track. You saw Ben Johnson's competitiveness on the sideline as a coach come out, coaching a guy like Jamison Williams, right? Getting fiery with him when he has to tell him, hey, knock it off, dude. Quit messing with Tyreek Stevenson. But then also his biggest advocate as he's streaking down the middle of the field for a touchdown, and Antwaan Randle's running step for step with him because that sense of pride he has in how he coached him up. So I'm excited for a guy like that to be in this locker room, because I do think the Bears have guys that have leadership qualities. I don't think they were great leaders last year. They had way too many captains that I think they need to trim that number down. But I think they have plenty of guys on this team that can be leaders. You don't have to just have a captain patch on your chest to be a leader. But I do think guys like Antwaan Randle coming into this coaching staff and Al Harris, you have one on the offensive and one on the defensive side of the ball that can try to pull this out of some of these guys, and specifically some of these veterans, and get them to understand, like, hey, you've figured out how to be a success yourself, but this is how you are successful as a leader that's going to inspire the rest of your team. Because I didn't see much inspiring going on with the team that currently resided at Hallis Hall this last year. So I just think they need a little more toughness and a little more leadership, and I think a guy like Antwaan Randle is going to bring that in bunches to the Bears locker room.
Yeah, I know. I think of some plays too from last season where you were sometimes wondering, like, what is going on the sideline there? Like, what are these guys thinking? What are they doing? The accountability, which is a word that's thrown around like way too much, but I think Antwaan Randle is going to bring a lot of that to the Bears, and I love that he's got the associate head coach title. Absolutely deserved, well earned. Antwaan Randle, he literally, I don't remember. I know I didn't lose it in a move. I've got, well, actually, no, we don't use nobody uses a mouse pad anymore. But back in the day, I had an Antwaan Randle mouse pad. You have one. I'll look at you.
Old school. I get yelled at when I use it on the set. They're like, do not use a mouse pad. I'm like, this is ridiculous. It's easier than the pad, the track pad.
Oh, I love it. I am with you. And I got to go out there because I have an Antwaan Randle mouse pad from Indiana that they sent to me years ago. I used to, when I was working, before I worked for the NFL Network, I worked for NFL Publishing. And so I was the guy in charge of making sure we got all the college media guides, which was amazing. So I always had every call. So I had 100 college media guides in my office every year. I did the Miller Lite handbook. I did the college schedule, all this stuff. And so you would end up with things like that the schools were sending out to promote Heisman candidates. And Antwaan Randle was obviously a Heisman candidate. Then he gets drafted by the Steelers. He goes to the NFL rookie premiere, which was at the Rose Bowl this one year. It was the year that Joey Harrington came out, because I remember this. And the white guy from Nebraska who was a quarterback, Eric Crouch, I think it was.
Yep.
So I go up to Antwaan Randle, and you notice, and you're like, hey, I notice you're from Riverdale. I go, hey, did you hang out with Archie and Jughead and Reggie? And he's like, what the hell are you talking about? And I'm like, you've never heard of like the Archie comics? They're from Riverdale. It's like, that is the dumbest thing. So he just wasn't having any part of it. Like, very nice guy. He was.
People forget. Like, you talk about Cordell Stewart and Michael Vick back in the day, when like all the talk was about Michael Vick. Yeah. But Antwaan Randle was like the secret mixtape that you didn't know about. Like, if you just watched the highlight reels of Michael Vick, well, here's Antwaan Randle for you real football junkies. Like, he was a menace. He was one of my favorite players to watch growing up. And then for him to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers and then be the guy that threw a touchdown pass. I wonder what the circa odds were on that, because, you had, anybody that knew what he did in college knew he was capable of that. And for most of the world, that came out of nowhere that day when the Steelers won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you would take the over 2.5 people throw a pass prop, if you could ever find it, Sammy. But it's one of those things too. Like, Antwaan Randle, I always felt was like the band that was opening up for the tour, like the headlining act. So if Michael Vick was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Antwaan Randle was the Black Crowes. And you're like, oh, this is pretty nice. I kind of actually like the opening band better than the main event. Like, not that Michael Vick was obviously very good, but like, I feel like Antwaan Randle, and I'm curious if I ever get a chance. I don't know if I ever want to talk to him, because I don't think I'll ever come back from the Riverdale discussion.
I think you can bounce back.
I will be all right. I think we'll seal it. Maybe he's the fan of the Riverdale show on the CW, and he'll be more enlightened I guess not everybody grew up reading Archie comics like I did. So.
I was gonna say, if you're gonna drop a CW reference to him now, like you're just going back to the well of references he may or may not get.
Probably not going to hit still. So I'm probably if he had already gone 20 years of his life not knowing that Riverdale was this town in this fictional comic book, I don't think that's changed in his life. No, that's got to no, because the name of the show is Riverdale. The show's not Archie. The show's name is Riverdale. He knows now.
You know what? I think you should run it back. I think you should run it back.
I'm gonna run it back. I want it to be as awkward as ever. I want it to be as dumb, and I want him to remember me. He might even, and it's always surprising too, because you probably find this too. Like people will be like, "Oh yeah," like you run into like a Bears personnel guy or whatever, or somebody who plays for the Bears. They're like, I know who you are. You're like, oh no, is that good or bad? Like you're like, no, it's good. Like usually it's good. Antwaan Randle could be like, no, you're not the. But I would never. I'm trying to think of like all the Lions people who are being hired. Like I'm like, who was I clowning any? Obviously I would not have clowned JT Barrett. Obviously not Antwaan Randle, who's been one of my favorite guys. Al Harris might be a little chat. I could see him not liking me initially. I might have to go mend that fence.
Yeah, Al Harris, I think we all have some fence men. Like, I mean, it's thank God Twitter wasn't around when he was playing, because I'd have some tweets to delete about him, because he certainly pissed us off more than a few times. And so I'll find some forgiveness in my heart if he's able to, really inject some energy and some leadership and some culture into this locker room, some toughness, because we all understood why we didn't like him on the Packers, and that's because he was a great player and a thorn in our side. So I'm looking forward to him. Everything that I've heard from Dallas has been nothing but good things, and they've developed some really good secondary talent. But I'm interested to see what he can do for the locker room as a whole.
Yeah, it's one of those things too. Like I know that I'm friends now with James Jones. So if I could be friends with James Jones, then I think that I could, outside of Aaron Rodgers, I think I could be friends with just about anybody. James Jones was a guy, and I've told him this on numerous occasions. Actually, I think one of our first conversations was how much I didn't like him. And he actually came on the show one time when he was on the fantasy show when he was playing for the Packers. And he's like, he comes onto the show. He's a Packers player. And he goes, by the way, where's that Bears fan at? Where's the Bears guy? Oh, there you, and he called me out. And I'm like, James Jones is calling me out on national television? Like, it was incredible. But you had those guys. And the reason you didn't like him was because he was good. You're just like, yeah, you don't like somebody who's like, you're not mad at somebody who's awful. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, You're like, so it was good. It's a good, I'm looking forward to sitting down and mending fences with Al Harris, reviewing the Riverdale conversation with Antwaan Randle, and really excited about JT Barrett too. I think that was kind of a under the radar move that I think is going to end up being really well. How about you?
Well, I'm certainly excited. I mean, I haven't been able to see anything up close as far as what he's done as a coach, but it encourages me that, because we kept talking about Mark Brunell last week. I was obsessed with the idea because I've heard about their relationship. So that's where I started to kind of go ahead and say, let's see what we can do to get Brunell in here. But for the same reasons now that I'm encouraged that JT Barrett is here. And that's, you're bringing somebody over from that staff that has a quarterback background. Obviously, Mark Brunell's resume as an NFL quarterback is much more illustrious than JT Barrett, but both obviously have played the quarterback position at a high level at some point in their career, and both having their connection to Ben Johnson coming over here. So those check some very, very important boxes to me. So I'm excited to see what he can do with Caleb Williams, because, getting a healthy room around him that's going to mentor him. And obviously Ben Johnson's going to have a big part in that. So it's key, when everybody talks about, looking at, well, a good coach has to have a good coaching tree to pull from. Well, good coaches have to plant those seeds to have a tree, right?
Yeah.
You're not always going to have the branches fully grown and developed. And when Dan Campbell, made his start in Detroit, Nobody knew that Ben Johnson was this little seed that was going to turn into what he's become. Nobody knew that Aaron Glenn was going to turn into what he's become. And you look at, the potential of a guy like Antwaan Randle. You're looking at guys getting elevated in Detroit now. So that is one way that you develop your coaching tree. You plant the seeds and let it grow. You can't always get guys that are already developed. And the hope is that Ben Johnson starts to develop his own coaching tree the same way that Dan Campbell has. So I just look at guys like JT Barrett, Declan Coyle, certainly getting elevated at a certain point in their career here, young in their coaching careers. But those are seeds that could develop into, a very healthy tree for Ben Johnson.
Yeah, even when you think of the with the growth of Ben Johnson, he did not start off as the offensive coordinator or the play caller for the Detroit Lions. Of course, that was Anthony Lynn, who came in a limited spot, a guy who himself was a former head coach who was there for Dan Campbell to lean on. And I think that even though the play calling and everything didn't mesh with Anthony Lynn, but his time in Detroit was still valuable, because I think that having somebody there who, again, has called a timeout on an NFL sideline, even though Dan Campbell did have some experience as an interim coach, really helps. And it really is, it's proven to be like, okay, this is something that needs to be done for stability. And then eventually he gets replaced and Ben Johnson gets his opportunity and he turns Jared Goff into a great quarterback, pretty good quarterback. I'm great. Fine. I'll say great. Like, I don't think that he's elite, but he's a great quarterback. I think he does a lot of nice things. There's no reason to sit there and kind of dismiss him or make jokes, because like they were the number one seed. He's taken the Rams to the Super Bowl. There's a lot of things that were working in his favor. But I do say, though, we've heard from the Lions fans a lot who, and they're out of their gourds. They are just so like, I don't blame them, because they've never been in this position where it's like, they're upset. They're questioning the loyalty of Ben Johnson and all this stuff. It's like, this is what happens when teams are good. Now, I know for the Lions, you haven't been good since the 50s with Bobby Lane. So you don't understand what it's like when people come and raid your coaches and take coaches from your team because you were successful. It's kind of like if you are, it's like that movie, She's Out of My League. The nerd doesn't realize what it's like to go out with an attractive woman because he had never done it before. And for a lot of these Lions fans, they don't understand, like, no, like, this is what happens when teams are good. People take your coaches. I'm kind of amused by it all. I think it's hilarious watching the Lions fans cope with this. It has been one of the better subplots of the offseason.
It is entertaining. There's no question. I think from a fan point of view, I understand it. The body wasn't even cold yet for the 2024 Detroit Lions, and Ben Johnson was already hopping on a private jet to Chicago, and you're still salty about a bad loss to Washington, and so now you're reeling, trying to understand the why of how that happened, and you've got a coach in Ben Johnson that's been flirting with the Chicago Bears, running trick plays when you're in Soldier Field, talking about how he's been planning all year of preparing how he wants to be a head coach. And then less than 24 hours after the loss, he's off to Chicago, whereas Aaron Glenn, it took a little more time to facilitate. He doesn't go in the division. So I get it. Are they being overreactionary? 100%. Like, that's the nature of the business. But I just think from a fan point of view, you're still in a state of shock that your team is no longer in the playoffs. And now you have to take this guy that has had an integral part in your success and understand that he's now your enemy. Like, that's a tough pill to swallow. And I can remember when, Horace Grant, I know, much maligned. It's a little different, but he went to the Orlando Magic and then the Bulls played the Magic that next year. Like, he's public enemy number one here in Chicago. We didn't like him, and so hopefully we can knock them out of the playoffs next year. Much like once upon a time when Horace Grant once knocked out the Bulls and broke little Gregory Braggs' heart at the age of 11 or whatever I was.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great analogy there too. And also, it's something that was unfortunate for the Lions because typically when these kind of things happen, when it's both your coordinators, you're typically coming off a Super Bowl appearance. I know it happened for the Philadelphia Eagles. It's happened to the New England Patriots. So you at least have the thing of like, well, we were in the Super Bowl, and now after the Super Bowl hangover is starting to kick in, then we lose our coaches and everything. Like you lost in the divisional round. Like you didn't even win a playoff game. It's very rare for these teams. Like only one team in each conference gets a bye, and then you lose. And you lose to a team that ended up getting a 50 burger hung on them in the NFC Championship game. So you really are just reeling from all this stuff. A team that you should have destroyed rightly, and it just didn't get done. And I get the angst. I understand, but at the same time, like you knew this was happening. You knew it was going to go. Like you knew, like it had already been written. Like, hey, it's like when Joey was moving out of the apartment at Friends. Like, what is he going to do? He wants a chance to live alone. Now let's hope that we don't end up with a roommate like Eddie, but still, this is what happens with these coaches.
Yeah, well, and I think they were hoping maybe some of those reports of the Raiders would end up true. Like they wouldn't care if Ben had left as much if he had went to the AFC, but he goes to the Bears, So I just think that plays a big hand in it too. So I think fans started to get their hopes up as the reporting momentum started to shift in the Raiders' favor, and then all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from underneath them as fast as their head could spin, as their heads were already spinning from a tough loss to the Commanders. So hey,
well, they were wish casting. He was going to the Raiders.
100%. And then the Raiders were doing the same. So they were just feeding that beast to each other. I had no hand in any of that, so I take no responsibility for them being let down. We tried to warn you guys. If they had watched our program, Adam, if they were Lions fans or if they're Raiders fans, we know Don Burr tunes in here to this show. So like,
is he still around, or is he given up now?
He's always around, and so he knew from watching our shows, like we said, Ben Johnson's coming to the Bears, but it's just all about who you listen to these days, and apparently Lions fans and Raiders fans were getting information elsewhere.
Oh, JT the Brick. My friend Vinny Vaughn Sr. Was out there again, and I know Vinny. And so, again, like these guys, I think the Raiders actually thought they had a shot. And I think that's the big thing. And that's where these reporters get into trouble, is because the guys in the building who will be, they'll be confident about something that they shouldn't be confident about. They had no reason to believe it. Like when you heard Rick Smith go on, and I was on a show with Rick Smith, and listening to some of the other media stops that he made, it's like, dude, he was always going to Chicago. There was never a thing. That was something that I told somebody, the guy down in Jacksonville today. It's like, don't be upset about the Trent Baalke thing, because Ben Johnson was never coming to Jacksonville. It's an attractive job. Trevor Lawrence is great. I don't think it's anything to be said about the Khan family or Jacksonville or anything like that. But Ben Johnson wanted to come to Chicago. The general manager was not an issue. When he put out that statement, now that we can see it, it's kind of like when you watch a movie, like you're watching The Sixth Sense, and you're like, oh, of course this kid was dead. Like you see all the signs now. I did see it at the moment, but still, like you saw that Ben Johnson was coming. You're the guy who understood that he was dead. Bruce Willis was dead. Greg knew that, and he knew that Ben Johnson was coming here. But when you go back and look at it, when Ben Johnson was coming out, and this was my thing, because I was like, whoa, guy, like slow your roll. Like stop asking for a general manager to get fired. But really what he was saying was, hey, let the general manager do his job. I don't want the owner and the team president stepping in where they don't need to step in, which is why, and again, when Kevin Warren came out and said, this is all Ryan Poles, he's hiring him, we took that and we're like, yeah, right, whatever. Kevin Warren's going to throw his weight around. And it's like, no, he was legitimately saying that to Ben Johnson to let him know, That like, no, I'm not interfering. Like if Ryan wants you, I want you. And that's how it played out. That's exactly how it went. So congratulations to us. But I do want to ask, or I do want to just point out too, for those of you who are asking, we have not hired an offensive line coach.
Right.
Justin Fry of Ohio State is a candidate, as is Dan Rorschach. Yeah, it's the biggest one. Yeah, thanks, Flexing. By the way, Flex Diggs, thanks for being on every show. Appreciate you. If it wasn't this one, he was on with me the other day when I was on something. I don't know. I've seen Flex around a lot, so I appreciate you.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
But do you have a preference between Justin Fry and Dan Rorschach? I mean, I don't. I wish I was nuanced enough. I know that, like, by reading the bios and seeing who they've worked with, both of them would be upgrades, but is there one guy that you're sort of favoring?
I mean, NFL experience is always going to, hold a high regard when you're looking at a resume. I'm not going to pretend like I know, who I'd prefer one over the other as if I've watched how they've coached. So certainly I'm not going to go that far. I mean, but if you look at, the offensive line coach for Ohio State, I think, a cynical person would be able to say like, well, you've got the best players every year, right?
Yeah.
They had 2 offensive line injuries. Seth McLaughlin, their center, who I saw up close and personal when I was at the Northwestern Ohio State game at Wrigley Field, and maybe even made a recruiting pitch to come to the Bears. Maybe might have sources, maybe. And then they also have an injured left tackle in Josh Simmons, who's highly regarded coming out in this draft. Well, they're both hurt, and they won the national championship, and they were road grading for their way to a championship there for college football. So to me, that's okay. When you look at when they brought in Harry Hiestand from Notre Dame, I, at least as a Notre Dame fan, watched that a little more closely, understood how good of an offensive line coach he was, and he obviously had a resume that dated, that preceded what he had done at Notre Dame. This guy here at Ohio State, highly regarded, sure, and I'll take people at their word for it. But if all you're going to tell me is, well, he was successful with Ohio State, well, they get pretty good recruits too. How are you going to do at the NFL level? Whereas, you look at the Rorschach test, as I like to call it, coming from New Orleans, 10 years of NFL experience, that holds a little more weight as far as trusting that it's going to work.
No, absolutely. And I know he's at Tulane right now, but it's like, dude didn't want to sell his house. Like, he was loving New Orleans, and he was staying there. So I don't hold that against him. The Ohio State guys don't impress me. I don't like Ohio State. I'm sorry. Sorry to all our fans. I don't.
Well, JT Barrett came from Ohio State, so you got to take.
I know. That's tough. And Justin Fields did, I guess, spend some time at Ohio State. I still think of him as a Georgia guy. There's something about Ohio State, and this is the thing around the NFL. So some people in the league, some current players, not on the Bears. This is not a Bears. This did not come from Bears people. This came from people around the league. They're like, Ohio State guys. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, have you ever heard like, hey, there's an Ohio State guy who might or might not play who ends up playing? He's like, they don't play. He's like, there's something about Ohio State that is just, they get the best, they get a lot of great players, but they don't seem to reach their full potential. And I'm like, oh, wow. I'm like, somebody was really just like spilling the tea. And I'm like, oh, this is all interesting. And then it's so funny because I think I'm pretty famous for this now. Of like, I don't watch a lot of college football anymore. I haven't watched college football ever since my kids got into youth soccer. So that's where I spend my Saturdays. I can't sit around. The one college game, one regular season college game I watched live this year was Ohio State and Michigan. And all I remember is that somebody got maced because Michigan planted the flag in the middle of the field. And Ryan Day's sitting there going like, what happened? Like, what's going on? Like, no account. Talk about the Matt Eberflus of college football. Matt Eberflus should have gone to college. Like, that's a place where your attitude will fly because there was no accountability on the sideline for Ohio State. And yet somehow they won a national championship because 40 teams make the playoff now. And it's like, oh yeah, college football used to have this great system of like, hey, who are the 2 best teams? Okay, let's have them play. Whereas now they're like, hey, let's have SMU get a bye, or Arizona State gets a bye because they won the Big 12. No disrespect to Arizona State, a school that I love. No, they were not one of the 4 best teams. Boise State, like, stop it. So I really don't like that we're interviewing their offensive line coach. Just bring Roshar in and let's be done with it. I think he's the best fit. And I think we have a little bit of the New Orleans connection. And once New Orleans starts their fire sale, which is inevitable because that organization needs to be taken down to the studs, or actually they need to trade their studs for some assets and do things like that. I'm ready. I would just take him. Okay, we got a couple of questions, though. Sammy's on my case. Sorry, Sammy. Do you have time for a couple of questions?
Yeah, of course.
You know what? I don't care if you do or not because I stay overtime because on Friday, I know when I should be going to the range. Yeah, I'm going to be sitting there answering questions on Not After Dark on Friday, whatever the show's called. And Carmen's going to be sitting there being like, Mark Carmen, hey, what is the most rational take you could have about pizza? And here comes Mark Carmen. I feel the exact opposite. Okay, perfect. We got questions, though. Sammy, how about the questions? Sorry, I'm screwing around. Logan wants to know, what do y'all think of these Barstool guys talking about how they think Aaron Glenn was a better hire than Ben Johnson and that Johnson will implode? Who are the Barstool guys? Is it Chicago Barstool? It's not Carl, is it?
Well, they're all in Chicago now. I mean, Barstool itself is located in Chicago. It's not too far from our studio, as I understand. I don't know exactly where they are, but yeah, there was a clip that went out this morning.
Was it Big Cat?
No, it was. I don't know his name. So, but I saw the clip, and it's just one man's opinion. So,
Jersey Jerry.
Yeah, it wasn't Jerry, but it was another guy. I forget his name. Vodka something. It was his handle had vodka in it, so maybe he was drinking a little bit of vodka. But you know what? He's entitled to that opinion. We'll find out here in a few months.
What does that stem from other than jealousy? Other than I just want to put a hot take out there that says I want to stand out from the crowd, so I'm just going to say that Ben Johnson sucks.
Well, I don't know what his intentions are and if he's a Bears fan or not. I don't think he is, because I don't think he's on the Barstool Chicago show. But at the same time, I think anybody that's sitting here because like right now we're in the honeymoon phase, right? Everything that Ben Johnson's doing, we're all in. This is the right move. It doesn't matter if they hire Rorschach or if they hire, the offensive line coach for Ohio State. We're going to rationalize it in a way that says this is why it's going to work out. And as we've known so many times as Bears fans, it ends up not working out. All the times that we've gotten excited about something, this time it feels right. And we say that, but we have said that before, even though this time it really, really, really does feel right.
Yeah.
It felt right last offseason with, bringing in the quarterback and the roster that it looked like and trying to hope for the best going into the season. So now we just kind of roll this, it just feels right mentality into offseason after offseason after offseason. So anybody that's sitting here like, well, I got to see it first. I don't begrudge anyone for feeling that way. Or if somebody says, fair. If until it happens, I'll never forget last summer, I'm playing some golf during training camp. And there was an older couple playing, they let me play through. And, so we were talking for a minute as we're waiting to tee off because there was a couple ahead that were taking a minute. And they asked me, what I'm doing and, what I'm up to. And I started talking about the Bears.
Why didn't you play with the couple then? Why did you have to play through? Why didn't you just play and go as a threesome?
Well, they were doing their own thing. I didn't want to intrude. They just let me play through. I don't know. Was that not right golf etiquette? I should have just played with them. I don't know. I just did what
I always ask, I hope that I'm asked to join. But whatever. Yeah. But if they wanted me to play through, that's fine too.
So this lady, she's like been a season ticket holder for like 60 years. And I told her I'd been going to training camp a bunch in the last couple of weeks. And she's like, well, how does the quarterback look? And I was like, he looks great. He does this. He can throw with anticipation. He's got a great arm. He gets out of the pocket, does all these great things. He's going to be great. She goes, yeah. well, I've heard that before. And I was like,
Yes.
I couldn't, even though I was like, come on, be positive, lady. I couldn't be mad at her because I was like, yeah, she's not wrong. I'm not going to sell her hope when she knows what she's been through as a season ticket holder for 50 years or whatever it's been for. So, I think we're just, as fans, we're at a point now where we're so scarred that as much as we want to push all our chips in and buy all the stock and hope that we possibly can until the Bears ultimately show what they can do on the field starting in September and then show it on a consistent base throughout next season. I think for a lot of Bears fans, they're tired of being burned and want to see the team live up to the hype for once.
Yeah, and it's kind of like what Kyle Long said, don't tell me, show me. And I'll be honest with you, that first game at Lambeau in week 1 when we were on the road at Lambeau to open the season, there'll be some part of me that's scared, that is nervous, that is like, God, please be able to move the ball. Please don't go through, like that kind of stuff. It's going to creep into your mind. It's hard not to. It's kind of like when you're, whatever you're fighting through on the driving range or whatever, whether you've been, hitting it off the hosel or doing whatever, you're like, I just don't want to hit this off the hosel. Like, please let me get a clean strike and go like that. You don't want to get those negative thoughts in there. That's fair. That's natural. And even, I said this in the coaching search when I was talking about Mike Vrabel, and I said, listen, Ben Johnson, I really love Mike Vrabel. I like Ben Johnson, but at the same time, like, you never know with coordinators. There's always an element of the unknown, which is fair. And we've seen it. Like, there have been coordinators I thought were going to be absolute studs who didn't turn out to be great coaches. There have been guys where I'm like, there's no way this guy hits, and turns out to be a good coach. Actually, I'm trying to think of one, but I, honestly, like, I remember when Matt LaFleur was hired with the Packers, being like, that guy's probably going to be pretty good. Like, sucks for us, but like, he's probably going to be pretty good. And there was no reason to believe that he was going to. You just kind of like, you never know. But to make such a definitive statement of saying, like, why is Aaron Glenn going to be better? Like, what is your basis for this? What about the Jets situation leads you to believe that he's going to be better? What about, and if you're going like, well, Bears are going to bear, like, okay, what have the Jets done? Why do the Jets get your confidence where the Bears wouldn't? Why would you just necessarily, of course, the Jets guy is going to work out, because no, if you have some sort of like infutable proof of like, this is why I think he would be better, other than it just being a hot take, what is the thing? What do you think about Ben Johnson is not going to lead him to be a good NFL head coach? Now, I've heard some people say this was something Mike Garafolo said, where he's like, Ben Johnson might be too intense for Caleb Williams. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds dumb. Like, I've talked to people about this. I'm like, I feel like Caleb wants to be coached. I think that, people think about him, being emotional after losing to Washington, but I'm like, that to me is more indicative of a guy who wants guidance and leadership, not somebody who's aloof and doesn't care. Caleb will break down and be emotional because he cares about what's going on. And if you care, you want to be guided and you want to be coached. So that I just want to know what it is. I want to know.
Anybody that's making any proclamations right now of why this coach is better than the other coach based off of a hiring between the Jags, Jets, or Bears or whoever, you are only basing it off of what you heard in a press conference. Yes, you have the resumes to go off of, and I understand there's a way of projecting those things onto the teams they're joining, but we're going to make fun of Liam Cohen because he doesn't know how to say Duval. We're going to get hyped because Ben Johnson.
It's Duval. It's not.
What did
you
I say?
said it wrong. It's Duval. It's not Duval.
Duval.
You said Duval.
Yeah, I don't
like
care.
You're talking about a pro golfer, like David Duval.
I don't care how they say it. They can say it. He messed it up. I don't care if I say it wrong. He messed it up. I'm not their coach. He is. He's got to get it right. So, and the whole question with Ben Johnson is like, how is he going to lead a room? How's he going to command? And he felt so commanding with so much leadership in his press conference that he won over a lot of Bears fans in that moment. Aaron Glenn, he comes out and says, well, I'm not just a defensive coach. I'm a football coach. and then he snaps at the New York media, I've given you the answer. Don't ask me again. And so for some people, I think those things are like the tell. Like this is, people are a good read on someone. And so this is what you're trying to go off of to project. But ultimately, until we see how these guys operate on the sidelines, how they lead the locker room, how they get their guys to buy into their system, everybody's just kind of, throwing the fishing line out and seeing what grabs.
Yeah, I know a lot of them were talking about how Ben Johnson was doing the L for which side is your left. And I think it was Mike Garafolo, actually, who sent me that. And I go, you don't understand what it's like being a left-handed person. Ben Johnson's left-handed. It's anytime somebody says go to your left, I fake motion a toss to know which way my left is. Because our world, we have to live in this right-handed world to where whatever seems natural to us is not natural. So you got to be like, oh, like that. Like, okay. Like even me, like I wasn't allowed to play golf left-handed as a child because we were, because Phil Mickelson wasn't famous yet. And nobody made left-handed golf clubs. So like, it's a lot of things. So I'm like, again, everybody's searching for reasons why this person's, because you just want to be right. And you want to be this, I think for the Barstool people in general, they want to be able to have like something to hang their hat on. And if you are like, hey, I'm going to go on the Chicago podcast and say that this guy's not going to work out. So if it doesn't happen, I can be like, hey, look at me. I nailed it. I told you guys. Does this person believe it? Probably not. Does he have any insight making this statement? He doesn't. But he wants to have that one-upsmanship of like, see, I told you guys, like I told you this was going to happen. There was no reason for it, but he did it. Is there another question too, by the way, Sammy? Now that I'm fired up on that one, do you guys see a scenario where we package these 2 second-round picks to get back into the first round? Frank, thanks for the question. I don't think that there is nothing's out of the ordinary, and we know that Ryan Poles, for whatever reason, hates second-round picks, can't get rid of them fast enough. I believe, though, I don't think that the Bears are 1 player away, 2 players away. However, I do believe, and it's actually not fair to say that he hates second-round picks because he did go out there and get Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker with 2 second-rounders during his first draft. I think he stays put. I don't think that there's any reason to move up. Whenever you listen to guys like Daniel Jeremiah, if you look at his top 50 list, he said like picks 20 through 60 are all about the same. So the difference between 21 and 61 is not as great as it would normally be in a lot of years. So if anything, the Bears could end up moving down because they want more picks and more bodies and more people that way. So I don't see that scenario. What about you, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I don't know. I don't think that. I don't know. I for me, the one thing that I'm a little concerned about is if the Bears are going to. I'm sorry, I just got a text from my wife, so I was just a little off.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. It was just about Addie here, so
is she okay?
Yeah, she's fine. She's fine. So I don't know. For me, it's just one of those things where I'm just curious to see where this is going to go going forward. But yeah. So I apologize. I apologize.
No, you're okay. I did want to ask you though, and this will be the last thing that we kind of cover here for today. I know that, in the future, we're going to get a lot more into our draft coverage and everything like that. But speaking of Daniel Jeremiah, his initial top 50 list is out, and sitting at number 3 is Ashton Jeanty. A lot of Bears fans would love for us to take Ashton with the number 10 pick, assuming that he is going to be there. Do you like that move, or do you have to see us make some bigger moves in free agency before you would entertain such a thing?
No, I think there's enough guys in the trenches that we can look at where, as much as you want to look at a running back at 10, Ashton Jeanty certainly is intriguing, but there are a lot of running backs in this draft. You can find guys later in the draft. And so for me, I think the biggest thing is you got to fill those trenches up as much as you possibly can. And maybe there isn't a guy on the offensive line there that makes sense at 10, but there are plenty of guys on this defensive line that I think are going to be available in this draft, especially in those first 2 rounds. You're looking at what's happening at the Senior Bowl right now. I'm in love with a guy like Mason Graham that I don't think would fall to 10. You'd have to trade up to get a dude like that. But for me, I'm doing everything I can to use my early assets to take defensive line. I have fun with guys on Twitter about Ashton Jeanty just to get people fired up. But I understand the concept of the trenches being of the utmost importance for the team this year.
Yeah, some of the guys who stood out to me as I made notes here, Walter Nolan, who's a defensive tackle, has looked pretty good. Gray Zabel, who's an offensive tackle from North Dakota State, I think has looked pretty good. A couple of edge rushers, Mike Green and Donovan, whose last name I'm not going to pronounce correctly, so I'm not even going to try. There's been some guys that stand out. Another name to look for is Jalen Royals, who's a wide receiver out of Utah State in the later rounds. After we get out of the first 2 rounds, is a late round like wide receiver pick to bring in some added depth. But for me, and I know that people are now speculating that Trey Smith is favored to go to the Chicago Bears, and I'm going to approach that with the same energy. Is like, well, if everybody seemed to be right about Ben Johnson, why not this? Even if we got Trey Smith and he's going to come in at guard, I still think it's important that those first 3 picks are used on either the offensive or defensive line. Running back is a luxury pick that we do not have this season. And so going forward, as much fun as it would be to have somebody like Ashton Jeanty join the Chicago Bears, I truly believe you got to go 3 picks in the trenches. Regardless, I don't care which side of the ball, but they've got to be linemen, and that's got to be the way they approach it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's, and then if you want a running back, I think there's good options later in the draft. I mean, obviously, everyone's going to talk about the Arizona State running back Scattaboo, but you've got Travion Henderson that played in the national championship for Ohio State. I thought he had really good ability and shiftiness and quickness. They also had Judkins too, that I thought, was a guy that some people, I think would prefer on their team. So to me, I think there's more than enough options at running back later in the draft if you want to look at speed, because certainly while you need to get beefed up on the O-line and D-line, I think that these skill position guys, they are going to have to find more speed, find another wide receiver. I think Tyler Scott, if he still finds a way on this roster, is going to have an opportunity to once and for all prove himself to a coaching staff, to get his opportunity to show off the speed he does possess. But then there's also, I think, wide receivers that potentially could be available in the 3rd, 4th round of this draft to help Ben Johnson kind of add to what they already have. So I would say meat and potatoes in those first couple rounds, and then start trying to find your speed skill guys to fit what Ben Johnson's trying to do.
Now, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And another name that I've really liked over the last couple of days from the Senior Bowl, Willie Lampkin, an undersized center, a really interesting prospect out there. Somebody to keep an eye on too as this continues to go forward. But in any event, I do want to thank you for joining us here this evening, Greg, as you always do. Always a good time, a great time to be a fan of the Chicago Bears. I hope that you can convalesce and be ready to go for New Orleans. I know you're heading down on Sunday. I will be there on Monday. So it's going to be here before we know it, and want to thank you for being here. But before that time, Friday, we will be on CHGO at noon Central Time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 o'clock here on the West Coast, which means I better hustle through my round. Oh, by the way, shot an 84 the other day. I didn't realize it. I shot a 45 on the front, which is that's about average for me. Like, I had a triple somewhere, had a couple but I was putting really well. So I'm like, it should be better. But then when I was adding up my score on the back 9, and I had 2 birdies. So this also helps you, like, oh damn, I had a 39 on the back. So it was pretty fun. So I'm getting there. The game's coming along.
Well, congratulations to you. I have to put my game on hold for the next
Why?
2 months because there's
'Cause of
snow
the Super Bowl?
everywhere.
Oh, that's right.
It's freezing. Because I live in a
Oh, that's
land
right.
where golf does not happen this time of year. So
Well, they had to close the range the other day because it was sprinkling. And I'm like, is this what it's like to live in the Midwest or East Coast? Like, this is garbage.
it sucks. It sucks.
I'm sorry. Well, you know
You're
what?
not, you're not sorry. You're
Okay,
not
okay.
sorry.
I legitimately don't care. I'm so sorry. I wish it's like watching your friend miss a putt. You're like, I honestly don't care. I'm worried about my shot right here. That's not true. I wish you could play year round. It would be a lot of fun, but we'll get you out here in the spring. If we made up at spring training, we'll be able to go out there and tee it up because I've got connections out there, and I've also got connections to Cubs stuff too. So, well, you probably do as well. So, what does it matter? In any event, we'll see everybody on Friday. CHGO, and unless there's some huge breaking news, otherwise we'll see you for the Sick podcast. We'll see you during Super Bowl week. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll hit the ground running on Tuesday of next week too, so get ready for that. A blitzkrieg of great content coming from New Orleans. So until that time, for Greg, I'm Adam. We'll see you around, and Sammy, go ahead and play us out.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Adam Rank on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcast. Brought to you by Circa Sports Illinois.